Okay. What about the big one? The advertising, the PPC costs and
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
So how do they get factored into?
Yeah, so I guess there's sort of two ways of doing it. Number one, you could just reduce the LTV by the PPC costs. We prefer to look at it as the other side of the coin, which is the metric I mentioned right at the top, which is customer acquisition cost, right?
Okay.
And so for us, the PPC or all the advertising stuff will get calculated in the CAC. And ultimately what you're doing is you're subtracting the CAC from the LTV. You're saying LTV minus CAC, right? So when you talk about an LTV, in a strict sense, it should be after your customer acquisition costs, right? Once after you've recouped everything you've spent to acquire the customer, then how profitable is that customer?
Okay, so you have walked right into what I wanted to talk about because
Good.
that's the structure, right? So on one side you have your lifetime value,
Yeah.
and on the other side you have your cost to acquire that particular customer. And
Yes.
that's the advertising, and not necessarily just your PPC. It's all your advertising efforts going.
Yes. So this is also a very tricky conversation because the most simplistic way is this idea of, how much did I spend in advertising to acquire a customer, which is to say, let's add up all the ad spend for, let's say, I don't know, sponsored brand, sponsored display, sponsored brand video, sponsored products. If you're running DSP, right, put that in, and then divide that by the number of new to brand customers for that month or for that period, right? So yes, that's, I think, is a decent way to do it. Then you can certainly get a lot more complicated, I guess, which is, some people will call it like a fully loaded customer acquisition cost, because ultimately, if you think conceptually, you're trying to capture all the costs associated with acquiring a customer. And so yes, advertising, like the actual PPC costs or the media costs, are one part, but ultimately you're paying people and using technology also to help with acquiring customers, right? So should you include the costs of your PPC software if you're using it? Should you include the cost of people's salaries or the agency costs if you're using an agency? Because what are they doing? Most of the time, they're pretty much about acquiring customers. So you can get into the weeds and you can ask 10 people for 10 and they'll give you 10 different definitions. I think a decent starting point is just to keep it simple, which is to say, let's just add up all the actual media costs, the ad costs, divide that by the number of new to brand customers. And that's telling you how much do I have to spend in PPC to acquire a new customer.
Okay. So yes, so I mean, those are all things. Frankly, the same approach applies to calculating your fulfillment cost if you were fulfilling it yourself. Because one order, people think that, oh, it's going to cost me. I ship by USPS and mine is no more than £1. Well, I mean, it's going to cost me $5.50. Well, no, it's not. What about your warehouse? What about your fulfillment? So, and then what about the rent and the insurance, right? So they all have. So, but going back to customer acquisition cost. So I think it's fair for listeners to say to themselves, okay, I'm going to have two different numbers. One is going to be just bare spending on bringing visitors so that they can become a customer for me. The other is with everything else, with the agency fees and whatever they decide, and they can contribute. So, but I want to define the calculation again. The calculation is, let's focus on the bare minimum customer acquisition cost, and that's the paid advertising.
Yeah, per ASIN.
All added up per ASIN.
Yes, because if you want to analyze let's say the lifetime value on a per ASIN basis, then you also got to look at like for like. You got to measure that against the CAC on the per ASIN basis. So on the CAC side, it's simply going to be sponsored brands, sponsored brand video, sponsored products, sponsored display per ASIN per month, let's say, and you're going to divide that by the number of new to brand customers who bought that ASIN, who for their first purchase bought that ASIN, right? Who bought ASIN A.
So, advertising spend is not always possible per ASIN on the
Yes.
sponsored brands. On
Correct.
the sponsored product, yes, but so how do you deal with those that
Yeah,
are
you
not
can weight them like sales weighted or spend weighted, etc., across the three ASINs, let's say on sponsored brands, things like that. Again, it's there's an issue, not issue, it's just a question of materiality there. Like if your customer acquisition cost is $10 and it goes to $10.07, there's not, again, not going to really materially change the calculation there. But so what we would do is, historically, what we've typically done is just take it like either spend weighted or sales weighted across the three ASINs and sponsored brands, for instance.
So I wanna okay, we kind of shifted a little bit, and I wanna make sure that we are keeping things in the right kind of silos, so to speak, so that we can compare. So customer acquisition cost is total paid spend, paid ads, divide by new customers acquired during that month. So
yes,
and of course it's not instant, because you may be spending on the 29th and 30th and 31st of the month, but the customers don't show up until the following. You just simply go by the calendar month.
Yeah, I mean, you could do things with the attribution window there as well, for sure. There's, and also Amazon's a little bit inconsistent on their attribution windows as well, right? So you've got 14 days for, I don't know, DSP, and you've got 7 days for sponsored products. The API actually, if you really want to get into the weeds, the API you can change that, right? You can actually say for sponsored products, I want to use 14 days. But anyway, yes. So you could run into some attribution period or window issues there,